The Finance Ministry of Uganda has planned to spend some 48 trillion Ugandan shillings in the next fiscal year, an increase of 7% from the current. Ausi Kibowa, an economist at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, Uganda, spoke to CNBC Africa for more.
The focus of this budget is about fully monetizing the Ugandan economy. So as at the moment, we have about 39% of households that are out of the monetary economy. And these are households that are in subsistence. They live hand to mouth. So the focus of the budget is really to drive those households into the monetary economy. So that is the key focus. Then one other thing the budget is really focusing on is commercializing the oil and gas sector. And then also on recovery, business recovery, but also on protecting households from the current price crisis.
It's interesting you mentioned the oil and gas because when you look at the budget, the government has dedicated a very significant share to the development of petroleum products. Is this because of the East African crude oil project, or there's more to this?
Yeah, exactly. This is really about the East African crude oil pipeline. So the government has given the national oil company about 900 billion to help it inject money into the crude oil pipeline. We very well know that our national oil company is in partnership with several other companies within the oil and gas sector that will be constructing the crude oil pipeline. So this is to facilitate our own national oil company.
Kibowa, when you look at the estimates in the budget, the government has cut the budget for mineral development, by about 32.7%. Does this point to the shift away from mining?
I really wouldn't hope so. I think the government's position on energy and mining has remained that developing countries are best suited to define their own path when it comes to adapting to climate change while not foregoing their development priorities. So I wouldn't really think that a cut in the mineral budget is really related to anything related to that climate adaptation.
Agro, processing and agriculture in general, when you look at the budget, there's a slightly, lower budget that has been allocated to this sector, about 3% cut. What will the people that advocate for agriculture be saying in the coming days?
Now, Uganda has a program-based budget. And what really happens is that money is allocated under different programs, and the hope is that these programs support each other. Now, if you happen to see that the allocation to the agro-industrialization sector is actually lower, then there are other programs that are intended to actually support. At least that's normally the position of the government. So we have under that program that I just mentioned, where the government intends to fully monetize the Ugandan economy, there is about 1 trillion Ugandan shillings that will be going into that. And all of that money will be supporting households to invest in agriculture, that is production, storage, value addition, and marketing. But that hasn't been specifically placed under the agro-industrialization budget. So I believe there are other components to that budget. That is my understanding.
Kibowa, when you look at manufacturing, it's getting a big boost with 419 billion Ugandan shillings allocation, which is an increase of around 404.7%. Do we know what kind of manufacturing is the government trying to prioritize in the coming fiscal year?
That is a space I really haven't been following. Yeah.
And what sort of sectors do you see that are likely to spark growth and enable the Ugandan economy to be able to go back on its recovery path?
Now, on recovery specifically, I would say supporting small businesses is really critical because many of them are under a liquidity crisis, and government has allocated funds to that, much as that isn't really adequate. So we have a small business recovery fund, which has received about 200 billion, and that money will go into providing cheap credit to small businesses. We have money going into the Uganda Development Bank, which will be supporting medium-sized businesses. We have money going into the Uganda Development Corporation that will be taking equity investments in large, really large businesses that are into manufacturing. So I guess that will be part of supporting recovery, but I also feel investing in public services, that is health, education, is really critical in supporting recovery process. So at the moment, several households have been pushed into poverty because of the pandemic, but also because of the cost of living crisis. And we believe that many of these households right now cannot support the education for their children. They cannot support their health needs. And it is then very critical that government steps up investment in those sectors. And I think government has really stood up to that. We've seen the budget for the health sector go up, budget for the education sector go up. Now, one that I'm really concerned about is social protection. I feel supporting households through things like cash transfers is really important in the midst of this current crisis, and if we are to achieve recovery. And that isn't an exceptional policy choice. I know several developed countries are actually undertaking that, including the US and the UK. So we hope that government would actually step that up, but that hasn't been the case. Not even 1% of that budget has been provided for that.
Kibo, as we conclude our conversation, the government has in the recent past struggled to raise revenue collection, but in this budget it insists that the domestic revenues is going to, increase by 19%. How has the government corrected the previous mistakes, especially those have to do with the loopholes within the tax collection system?
So what is really happening, and you're right, statistics, our domestic revenue collections will be just about 25 trillion. So in simply just only slightly half of our budget will be financed through domestic revenue collections. And that points to a gap. Now, one of the gaps, the major gaps, has been the tax incentives that are being provided to large businesses. And these are really sucking out a lot of revenue that would actually have supported the government. As at the moment, the government is developing a tax expenditure governance framework. And what is really intended with that framework is to help with decision making as regards who should really benefit from these tax incentives and how can we bring them down. So that is one way I believe that government is actually working on that issue.